Imagine unwinding by your own pool only to be accused of trespassing because of how you look. What happens next at Magnolia Creek will leave you stunned and alter the community forever. The late afternoon sun shimmered over the calm waters of the pool at Magnolia Creek Residences, a peaceful apartment complex in Austin, Texas. Jordan, a 32-year-old software engineer, relaxed on a lounger by the pool, enjoying a rare moment of quiet that his hectic job rarely allowed. He had just wrapped up a major project and decided to reward himself with some downtime, reading a book and sipping on an ice-cold lemonade. The atmosphere was tranquil, almost perfect, until the sound of footsteps broke the calm. Looking up from his book, he saw her, a woman in her mid-50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, and a demeanor that exuded an air of superiority. Jordan had seen her around the complex before, but had never spoken to her. She walked right toward him, her face a mix of confusion and suspicion. At first, Jordan thought she might be in need of help, but her expression quickly dispelled any thought of kindness. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp. "Do you live here?" Jordan paused, surprised by the directness of the question. "Yes, I do," he answered calmly, sitting up a little straighter. "Really?" she pressed, narrowing her eyes. "I've never seen you before. Are you sure you're not visiting someone?" The insinuation stung, but Jordan kept his cool. "I'm sure. Apartment 304. I've been here for 2 years. Her lips tightened as if she wasn't satisfied with the answer. "If that's true, then you should have your key card. Let's see it." The request felt jarring. Jordan's chest tightened as he considered his response. He wasn't about to let her ruin his afternoon. "I'm not obligated to show you anything," he said, keeping his voice steady. "If you have a problem, feel free to contact management." Her face turned red with indignation. "I will. I'm calling security right now," she snapped, pulling out her phone. Jordan sighed and leaned back in his chair, unwilling to engage further. He wasn't in the mood for a confrontation, but it seemed there was no way around it. A few other residents by the pool started to notice the scene, exchanging glances while others quietly pulled out their phones. The tension in the air thickened with every passing second. Jordan held his ground, his expression calm, refusing to let her shake him. He wasn't doing anything wrong, and he knew it. The woman stepped aside, raising her phone to her ear, her voice intentionally loud so everyone around the pool could hear. Jordan couldn't help but wonder how far she was willing to take this. The attention from other residents intensified, setting the stage for a confrontation that neither Jordan nor the onlookers would soon forget. "Yes, I'm at the pool," the woman announced into her phone, her words laced with self-righteous authority. "There's someone here who shouldn't be. He claims he lives here, but I've never seen him before. I need security down here immediately." Jordan could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him. The other residents weren't just watching, they were analyzing the situation. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, and a few openly disapproving. A young couple in the corner exchanged whispers, while an older man in swim trunks shook his head slightly. Still, no one spoke up. The woman, emboldened by the silence, turned back to Jordan. She folded her arms as if she had just won a battle. "You could have avoided all this if you'd just shown me your key card." Jordan met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I don't owe you anything," he said plainly. His calm response only seemed to enrage her more. "People like you think you can do whatever you want," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for him and a few bystanders to hear. Jordan's jaw tightened. He wasn't naive. He knew exactly what she meant by "people like you." But he refused to let her provoke him. Instead, he shifted his focus back to his book, flipping a page as if she were nothing more than background noise. Minutes later, a uniformed security guard appeared at the pool entrance. He looked young, probably in his mid-20s, and uncertain as he took in the scene. The woman waved him over eagerly, her face lighting up as if she had just been proven right. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she exclaimed, gesturing toward Jordan. "This man refuses to leave. He claims he lives here, but I know he doesn't. He wouldn't even show me his key card." The guard walked toward Jordan, his expression cautious. Jordan calmly set his book down and stood up, his height suddenly making him tower over both the woman and the guard. "I do live here," Jordan said, his voice firm but composed. "Apartment 304. You can check with management if you need to." The guard hesitated, glancing between Jordan and the woman, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. "Sir, do you have your key card with you?" Jordan reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open, revealing not just his key card, but also his driver's license, which showed the same address as the complex. "Here you go," Jordan said, holding it up for the guard to inspect. The guard nodded, his face slightly flushed. "That checks out," he said, handing the card and license back. "Sorry for the trouble, sir." The woman's face twisted in disbelief. "Wait, you're just going to take his word for it?" she demanded. The guard stood taller, his tone more formal. "Ma'am, he provided the necessary proof. There's nothing else to discuss." The crowd, which had been quietly watching up until this point, began to stir. A few people murmured to each other, and the young couple from earlier gave Jordan a small nod of approval. But before the situation could settle, a voice cut through the air. "Enough is enough." The unexpected interjection turned everyone's attention to a new figure. A neighbor stepping forward revealed a history that would completely shift the course of the confrontation. The voice belonged to an older woman, perhaps in her late 60s, who had been quietly observing the entire situation from her poolside chair. Dressed in a floral sundress and a wide-brimmed hat, she stood with an air of confidence that commanded attention. Her name was Eleanor, a longtime resident of Magnolia Creek, and someone known for her no-nonsense attitude. "Excuse me," Eleanor said firmly as she walked toward the small crowd, "but this isn't the first time this has happened, and I think it's about time someone said something." The woman accusing Jordan spun around, clearly caught off guard. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about," she said defensively. "Oh, don't play coy," Eleanor shot back, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You've been harassing people in this complex for months, and we're all tired of it. Just last week, you accused the delivery driver of loitering because he was taking a lunch break in his truck. And let's not forget the time you called the cops on the college kids moving into their apartment because they looked suspicious." The accusing woman's face flushed a deep red, and she opened her mouth to protest. But Eleanor wasn't finished. "And now this? Calling security on a man who's done nothing wrong just because you don't recognize him? You're embarrassing yourself." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, and some nodded in agreement. While some onlookers nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably. The focus had completely shifted away from Jordan. It was now squarely on the woman who had started the confrontation. The security guard, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation, stood awkwardly, but he didn't intervene. Jordan remained quiet, letting Eleanor take the lead. He could feel the tide turning, and it was a relief to see someone else standing up to the blatant injustice. "Do you even realize how ridiculous you look right now?" Eleanor continued, her tone firm but not unkind, ensuring her words landed with clarity. "We're supposed to be a community, treating people like they don't belong just because they don't fit your narrow idea of who should belong. That's not how we do things." A brief silence followed. Then someone clapped. At first it was just one person, but soon others joined in. The applause grew, filling the space and making the accusing woman shrink under the weight of the moment. "This is absurd," she muttered, but the confidence in her voice was gone. Gathering her things in a hurried, flustered motion, she turned on her heel and marched out of the pool area. Eleanor turned back to Jordan, her expression softening. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said. "It's not right, and it's not fair." Jordan gave a small smile. "Thank you. I really appreciate that." As Eleanor returned to her seat, the crowd slowly dispersed, but the energy in the air lingered. The incident wasn't truly over, at least not yet. Someone had been recording the entire confrontation, and the video was already making its way to social media. What began as a tense poolside argument was about to turn into something much bigger. The outside world was about to take notice. By the time the last of the onlookers left the area, a single video had begun circulating online. Lucas, a younger resident, had uploaded the footage to his social media with a simple but powerful caption. "This just happened at Magnolia Creek. When will this stop?" The clip captured everything: the woman's accusatory demands, Jordan's calm response, Eleanor's passionate stand, and the applause that followed. It didn't take long for the video to gain traction. Back in his apartment, Jordan sat on his couch, still trying to process the day's events. His phone buzzed nonstop. Friends, coworkers, and even acquaintances were tagging him in the video, flooding his messages with support and disbelief. He hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly. Meanwhile, in the leasing office, property manager Miss Delgado watched the video play on her screen, and she knew this wasn't something they could ignore. Miss Delgado had just been made aware of the situation. She scrolled through the video on her phone, her expression growing more serious with every passing second. This wasn't the first time complaints had been filed against the woman in question, whose name was Deborah. But this time, there was undeniable proof. Miss Delgado decided it was time to take action. She called a meeting with both Deborah and Jordan for the following morning. Though Jordan was reluctant to relive the ordeal, he agreed. He wanted closure, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been treated the same way. The next morning, the leasing office conference room felt tense as the three of them sat across from each other. Deborah looked far less confident than she had the day before. She avoided eye contact with Jordan, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Miss Delgado wasted no time getting to the point. "I've reviewed the footage," she began, her voice firm but measured. "Deborah, this behavior is unacceptable. You have a pattern of targeting residents and visitors based on assumptions that have no merit. This is harassment, plain and simple." Deborah sputtered. "I was just trying to keep the community safe. How was I supposed to know he lived here?" Miss Delgado's gaze remained steady. "It's not your job to police who belongs here. That's why we have security and a management team. Your actions have caused unnecessary distress to Mr. Harris and other residents. As of today, you are receiving an official warning. Any further complaints of this nature will result in the termination of your lease." Jordan stayed silent, watching as Deborah's face flushed with embarrassment. She tried to protest, but quickly realized she had no valid arguments left. Finally, she muttered, "Fine," before storming out of the room. Miss Delgado turned to Jordan, her tone softening. "I'm truly sorry this happened. If there's anything else we can do to support you, please let me know." Jordan nodded. "I appreciate that. Thank you." As he left the office, Jordan felt a mix of emotions: relief, vindication, and a lingering sadness that such an incident had happened in the first place. But the day's revelations weren't over. By the evening, the video had gone viral. News outlets picked it up, and hashtags like #JordanHarris and #CallOutKaren trended across social media platforms. The internet exploded with discussions about accountability, prejudice, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Strangers began reaching out to Jordan, offering support and sharing their own experiences. Sharing their own experiences and thanking him for handling the situation with dignity. What had started as a personal ordeal now carried a global weight. It sparked debates and conversations that extended far beyond Magnolia Creek. By the next morning, the video had amassed millions of views. It was everywhere, on social media platforms, morning news programs, and even major talk shows, all discussing the broader implications of racial profiling and accountability. Jordan's name and face became the center of a national conversation, something he hadn't asked for, but knew he couldn't ignore. He woke up to an inbox overflowing with messages. Strangers thanked him for his composure, sharing how his actions had inspired them to confront injustice in their own lives. Activists reached out, offering their platforms to amplify his voice. Even brands and organizations sent emails asking if he'd be interested in collaborating or speaking at events about his experience. But not all the responses were positive. Amid the flood of support, there were detractors, people accusing him of overreacting, of turning a simple misunderstanding into a spectacle. Jordan, though, didn't let the negativity faze him. He understood the bigger picture. The incident wasn't just about him, it was about a pervasive issue that needed to be addressed. His story had struck a chord. Meanwhile, the fallout for Deborah was swift and public. Someone from the complex anonymously shared more accounts of her behavior, adding fuel to the fire. Her name began trending alongside Jordan's. While some sympathized with her embarrassment, most condemned her actions. Calls for accountability grew louder, with some suggesting she attend anti-bias training or even face legal repercussions for harassment. Back at Magnolia Creek, the ripple effects of the incident were palpable. Residents who had once stayed silent began speaking up about their experiences, forming a community dialogue on creating a more inclusive environment. Ms. Delgado took the feedback seriously, organizing workshops and panels on unconscious bias and community building. The complex, which had once felt fractured by unspoken tensions, began to transform into a place of understanding and connection. For Jordan, the whirlwind of attention brought unexpected opportunities. He was invited to share his story on a prominent talk show, where he spoke candidly about the importance of staying calm in the face of injustice and the value of allyship. "It's not just about calling out bad behavior," Jordan said during the interview. "It's about creating spaces where everyone feels they belong, where no one has to prove they have a right to exist." The interview went viral as well, further solidifying Jordan as a symbol of resilience and grace under pressure. But for him, the true reward came closer to home. Neighbors he'd barely spoken to before started greeting him warmly in the hallways, offering kind words and genuine smiles. Eleanor, the neighbor who had stood up for him, became a regular visitor to his apartment. She often brought over baked goods and shared stories from her long life. As the dust settled, the incident became a catalyst for change, not just at Magnolia Creek, but in the broader conversation about how we treat one another. Weeks after the poolside confrontation, life at Magnolia Creek felt different. The community had shifted, and the tension that once lingered between residents seemed to dissipate. People began to see one another differently, not as strangers to be judged, but as neighbors sharing the same space, each with their own stories and struggles. Jordan noticed the change every time he walked through the complex. Neighbors he'd never spoken to before stopped him for small conversations or offered a friendly wave. Children played freely in the courtyard without their parents anxiously watching from the sidelines. It felt like the walls of suspicion and isolation had started to crumble, brick by brick. As for Deborah, her reputation within the complex was tarnished. Though she hadn't been evicted, she kept a low profile, avoiding common areas and walking quickly whenever she passed others. Rumors swirled that she was considering moving, but nothing was confirmed. What was clear, however, was that the incident had forced her to confront her behavior. Whether or not she would change was a question only time could answer. Jordan, meanwhile, took the lessons he had learned, and turned them into action. With encouragement from Eleanor and other supportive neighbors, he organized a community event at the complex, a barbecue open to all residents. The goal was simple: to foster connection and understanding among people who might never otherwise interact. The turnout exceeded everyone's expectations. Families brought homemade dishes, kids played games, and conversations flowed freely. Eleanor sat in a corner, chatting with a group of younger residents, her laughter ringing out over the sound of music and chatter. Jordan worked the grill, flipping burgers and handing out plates, feeling a sense of pride and fulfillment he hadn't expected. By the end of the night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jordan stood on the patio and looked out over the gathering. It wasn't perfect. There was still work to be done, conversations to be had, and barriers to break down. But it was a start. For the first time in a long time, the community felt like a place where people truly belonged. When the crowd began to thin out, Eleanor approached Jordan with a plate of cookies. "You've done something really special here," she said warmly. "I hope you know that." Jordan smiled, accepting the plate. "I couldn't have done it without you, Eleanor. You were the first one to speak up." She waved him off with a laugh. "Well, somebody had to. But you turned it into something bigger, something meaningful." As the evening wound down, Jordan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. What started as a moment of humiliation and frustration had grown into an opportunity for growth and understanding, not just for him, but for everyone involved. The viral video eventually faded from the headlines, replaced by the next trending story. But the lessons it carried remained. Jordan's actions, Eleanor's courage, and the community's response had sparked a ripple effect that extended far beyond the gates of Magnolia Creek. The story of Magnolia Creek reminds us that standing up against prejudice isn't just about confrontation. It's about building bridges, creating dialogue, and fostering spaces where everyone feels safe and valued. Small actions can lead to big changes, but it all starts with the courage to say, "This isn't right." If this story moved you, let's keep the conversation going. Share your thoughts, your experiences, and your ideas for creating a more inclusive world. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire, challenge, and bring us closer together.